warm Pachyderm Club welcome to our Sedgwick County Sheriff, Jeff Easter.
Well, good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here. I always appreciate when Mr. Peter John and before him, Mr. Todd, would invite me to come and speak to you all. I think it's very important that this group hears from law enforcement on either A, what we're facing, B, what we're doing about certain events that affect your lives, and C, just to get to know you better and you get to know me better. And so I'll kind of start off with we have had a brutal 3 years, last year not included, in law enforcement. And what I mean by that is you know, the protests, riots, in my opinion, the anarchy that was going on across the nation, we had a few of those happen here. And at the end of the day, those things were addressed very quickly, and they ended fairly quickly here in this community. But the toll it takes on our men and women within law enforcement, because when you're being screamed at and spit at and shot at, that happened at 21st and Arc, that's where you can get skewed to think that everybody feels that way. And I can tell you and rest assure you, and I tell this to our folks all the time, that's not the way this community is. 90% of Wichita Sedgwick County supports the efforts of law enforcement, and we see that every day. And so it's continuing trying to impress on our personnel that what we stand for is law and order. And 90% of the citizens in this community want that, and never forget that when we're out there doing our job. They want us to be fair, they want us to be consistent, they want us to make sure that we're above board and we're not committing crimes ourselves. But at the end of the day, we enjoy that support, and so I want to thank you for that. Part of the other issue that happened was COVID. And during that time frame, because of some low pay that was also there, especially in the detention facility, COVID, we weren't pulling in near as many people that were applying, and we're losing people by the handfuls, to the point we were down 127 deputies out of our 250. So we were over half staffed inside the facility, which then caused everybody else that wears a uniform. So when I talk about detention, those are the folks that work inside the facility. They're not law enforcement officers. And then when I talk about commission, those are law enforcement officers that you see out in the cars, enforcing the law, making car stops, assisting people, those type of things. All of us had to work in there for 2 years. That took a huge toll on our staff. Because that is not an easy job in there. Now, the good thing that came out of that is the folks that worked in there that have never worked in there before, they were coming to me in droves, say, pay them whatever you want, because I never want to work in there again. So it earned some respect for what those detention deputies do. It is a very difficult job in there, dealing with that population. What else happened during that time frame is the court shut down. So our population boomed to over 1,600 people. We only have 1,477 beds. And so a lot of the other outside counties did not want to take our people because of the COVID issues. And so we had them in cots, we had them in gymnasiums, those type of things. And so the ratio is usually 50-1 in there. It went up to 79 to almost 80-1, which is very dangerous for us, because the folks that were in there were the folks for murder, for the child sex crimes, for the rapes. A lot of the misdemeanor stuff was being released by judges. And a lot of the violent crime that was going on in there. So we had more violent crime taking place inside our facility than we did in the entire county. And I'm not talking about the police department, I'm talking about what we respond to. And so that was a morale drainer. Over time here, what's occurred, and I don't see any of the current commissioners in here. Over time, when I first came into office in late 2012, our starting pay for detention deputies was somewhere around $38,000. That's been raised now to $53,000. So because of that, we are seeing a lot more people apply, and our retention rates have shot through the roof. And so we have a class in right now of 16. Once they graduate, we'll only be 2 short on the detention side. We haven't seen that in like 18 years. And so, thank you. And so, there's some other things that contributed to that. Detention is a unique animal. And so we didn't feel that we were giving our supervisors the proper type of training to properly supervise our folks. And so we have engaged in training that our supervisors in the field get, such as FBI LEDA, SPI, some really high type of training for supervisor training. What we're seeing out of that is our supervisors are better trained and they treat our people better, because that was one of the complaints from our personnel, is that some of our supervisors didn't treat them very well. And I saw that myself because of just the nature of, I wasn't treated the same as a Wichita Police Department officer in the beginning of my career. It was sit there, shut up, do what I tell you to do, and go do your job. Okay? This generation does not react well to that. And so we've had to change our culture in the way that we supervise. We still hold people accountable, still have expectations, still have goals they got to reach. But the way that we talk about those has changed. And so the other thing that we did is health and wellness. And so in the culture of law enforcement, in my day and Mr. Beeson's day, you saw a lot of bad stuff or were involved in things that were very traumatic. You were seen as weak if you showed emotion on those. You were seen as weak if you talked about it, those type of things. So the culture was you just keep it all in and check 10-8 and go back out on the streets and make the next call. The studies have shown what that has contributed to my generation and my dad's generation that was a cop before me, was very high alcoholism rates, suicide rates, and divorce rates. And so we had to look at this and say, what can we do better for our folks that doesn't cost money and raises help, but that doesn't resolve everything. And to get people to stay with us, because we don't pay as much as the Wichita Police Department does or some other agencies. So we started a health and wellness unit. What that unit does is we give a lot of training on resiliency. We give a lot of training to the entire sheriff's office on how to stay healthy, both in the body and the soul, and in the mind. The key to it, though, is that it's a, I want to be careful here. Therapy is not something we reach out for in all first responders, not just cops, because of the connotation of it and those type of things. The problem is the amount of therapy that folks need, whether it's work-related, marriage-related, kid-related, finance-related, and if they are not functioning in that environment, do you want them being cops functioning for you? Because you don't, because there's going to be mistakes. There's going to be times when they blow off the top of their head over something very minor. And I've seen that throughout my career, and you find out they got something going on at home that was never addressed. And so what we did, within my own budget, we found money to hire a therapist within the sheriff's office. So she actually answers to me, that provides free therapy to our personnel and their immediate family. How quickly do you think she booked up? Immediately. Now, before that, we started what was called peer support, where we trained 62 members of the sheriff's office throughout the department that if someone has an issue, they can come to that person to talk about it. Now, those are things that are not privy to me or anybody else, unless they're a danger to themselves or others. And there's also a state law on that. And so if they're a danger to themselves or others, they have to report it. But everything else that they talk about is between them. And so we had to build that trust, and it took a little bit of time to do that. So once we brought in the therapist, they immediately trusted her because it's somebody that they knew through Impact that we'd been dealing with for quite some time, and immediately started seeing her. It's so much so that we've hired an intern from WSU who also plays golf there. So this summer I need to get some lessons. And she's booked up as well now. We've also opened that up to other first responders inside of Sedgwick County. So EMS, fire, dispatchers, and DAs. And they've started utilizing that service. But what we've seen out of that is retention. These folks know that we actually care about them. They're just not a number. We care about the job that they do and their health. And so the next step for us is looking at how we bring in some type of health and fitness. So cops, for some reason, after they leave the academy or they leave the streets, they start eating too much and setting too much. And these folks are working out in jail. The inmates are still working out in jail. We don't offer equipment by no means, but they're doing push-ups and set-ups. And when they go to prison, they get every piece of equipment you can imagine. So when they get out, they're a lot bigger than when they went in. We have to be able to defend ourselves with those folks. And so trying to get that through to our folks' head. Now, some of them absolutely believe in fitness and eating right and those type of things. But those are other things that we're working on. So all of those things combined is what's made our organization much healthier from a standpoint of retention, hiring, and then just the overall health of our personnel. So one of the things that I brought up about the amount of inmates that we have. We were packed to the gills, over 1,600 inmates for years, and Commissioner Peter John, I don't know where he went, but there he is, would call me about once a month saying, hey, what's your population? And it's a legitimate concern. This county has built 2 county jails for other counties over the years because the amount of money we pay for our inmates to be shipped to their counties. I have an annual budget of $2 million for out-of-county housing only. And so over the last year and a half, we got below 1,000 inmates, which they hadn't seen in over 20 years. Now, do I think part of that is because the courts got back open? Yes. Another big piece of it is crime has gone down in this community, both in Wichita and Sedgwick County, which has contributed to our jail population. This morning, we're sitting at 1,185 inmates. And so last year, we gave $2 million back to the county. We didn't spend a dime out of that. I'm not the type of person, I'm very judicious with your tax dollars. So I'm not a person that says, okay, we got that $2 million there. What else could we buy with it? No, that $2 million is there for... That $2 million is earmarked for out-of-county housing and only out-of-county housing. Now, do I have upper staff level that grunch with me about that? Oh, yeah. Yeah, because they see all kinds of toys they want to buy. That's not what that's for. We can save money on overtime and those type of things to afford, if we need a new drone, we need other equipment, then we need to really scrutinize our overtime, which we are. And we saved about, because of our staffing levels going up, we saved a little over $1.5 million in overtime last year. Yesterday surprised me. Whenever you come into the jail lobby, I don't know if any of you have come in the back door, that means you're going to jail. But if you go in the front door, that means you're there for a tour or to visit. So if you come in the front door of the lobby at shift change, I very rarely saw deputies that were leaving. That's because they had to do an extra 4 hours or 8 hours. And so yesterday, there were 16 of them leaving when I was walking in at 2:30. I checked, we had 1 person on overtime. And so all of that is budget savings to you guys as well from your tax dollars. And so I'm very, very happy with the direction that we're going. The jail population is one of those things, though, that can turn on a dime. If violent crime goes up, those type of things, our population goes up because a lot of those folks, their bonds are so high they're not going to get out of jail. The other thing that is concerning is child sex crimes and child abuse. We used to have one pod that was nothing but those type of offenders. They had to be in their own pod because the other inmates don't take kindly to those folks. And so they'll beat them, they'll do all kinds of things to them. Well, now we have 2 pods because the sex crimes against children is up. When you talk about computers, we're seeing a big increase there. Where people are posing as 13-year-olds to entice other 13 and 14-year-olds online. They meet them, they sexually assault them, and then they go back to whatever community they came from. And so We do all kinds of stings on that type of stuff through our ICAC unit and EMCU unit to try to stifle at least the folks coming from out of town that do that stuff. But the abuse and the sexual assault in the homes is up. And we're seeing a lot more cases of us having to take children into police protective custody because of that. And then on the back end, we investigate those particular crimes. Most of those bonds are really high. Judge Smith, are you still down at juvenile?
No, I've been a criminal for about 6 years. I'm just now moved to civil.
Criminal, okay. I knew you were down there for a little while, and we're seeing an increase in cases in the juvenile court system too. So part of that problem is there was a Senate Bill 367 that was passed several years ago, which was juvenile justice reform. And there's a piece of it that's very problematic, folks. And we're trying to fix that in the legislative session this year. 90% of the kids that was going to affect are, one-off offenders, those type of things. Should they be in the criminal justice system where they're around other kids to teach them to be worse criminals? No. But there's 10% of them that are non-stop criminals. And when Senate Bill 367 came in, it tied the judge's hands on what they could do with those kids, which means they're back out in the community nonstop. And these kids tell us, there's nothing you can do to me. And they're right. And so what's happening is this kind of collapse of the foster care system and then these group homes that we have. Because these are the kids that are going to those, and the foster parents are like, this kid's out of control, come get him. So it's a police call. Now where do we take him? There's no place to take him. We can't take him to JDF. And so that 10% is overloading the system. And what you might not know, because we have the group homes that we have down here, there was 444 kids outside of this county placed in this county. Let that sink in for a minute. Why do you think our juvenile crime rates went up? Partly because of this bill and because of these other kids. There was, Wichita Police Department had 3 kids under the age 18 that were placed in a group home out east. That's not a lockdown facility. And they were responsible for 32 criminal cases that they end up getting charged with. 2 of them from Wyandotte County, 1 from Parsons, Kansas, or Chinook, Kansas. That's just 3 kids. And so we have got to revamp that part of the bill because it is creating for all of us to be victims of these kids when they shouldn't be out. And so we have 2 of these group homes out in the county, 1 out west by Lake Afton, 1 clear up north. The amount of calls that we're making there, now they don't run away from there like they used to in the city because they're out in the middle of the county. So they're not going to run away out there. But what we are responding to, them refusing to go to school, them assaulting staff, them assaulting other staff. We just worked a sexual assault at the one up north. The amount of calls we're responding to there is, to be real honest with you, is pretty ridiculous. Now, I get why they're calling. I'm not saying that, but these kids shouldn't be in those homes. And that's kind of what we're facing. And so any question, well, I guess we're going to wait, Gary, until after for questions. And I'll leave plenty of time for questions. The one last thing that I want to touch on, which I'm sure everybody is wanting to know, immigration. All right. Okay. So there is, you really need to understand immigration and understand that there's a reason why local law enforcement isn't tasked with immigration law. Because one piece of it is criminal, one piece of it is civil. So if you enter this country unlawfully, then that's the criminal side, which is a Class A misdemeanor in federal court. Okay? If you overstay your visa, if you do some of those other things that you were granted permission into the country, that's a civil process. Traditionally in law enforcement, we don't deal with civil issues. If you have a civil case, if you're calling us because you and a neighbor are disputing a property line or something like that, we don't take people to jail for that. We'll make a case on it to document what we were told, but you got to go to court. Same thing in federal court. So I'm sure all of you have heard of detainers. And detainers is the civil side of this. So if ICE comes in and puts a detainer on somebody, it's not a warrant. It's a detainer asking us to hold them for an additional 48 hours so then they can come pick them up and then do whatever they do with them. If they get a warrant, which would be the criminal side of this, which we've never seen a criminal warrant. It's always detainers on the civil side. If they get a warrant, they can be held in our custody for as long as they choose to hold them, or until they bond out or something like that, like any other criminal aspect. So I wanted to explain that because that's two separate offenses that they enforce with ICE. So here in Sedgwick County, we honor the detainers. So you'll see the news around other cities and stuff where they don't honor those. I will tell you here in Wichita, we're very fortunate. And the reason I say that is if you have somebody that's come here unlawfully or illegally, whatever term you want to use, and they're charged with a crime by the DA, there's a bond set. Most of those folks are pretty serious crimes, such as your murders or rapes or robberies, those type of things. They're generally not getting out. So they'll stay there until they go to trial. Either they get found not guilty, they plead, or are guilty. That detainer is on them just in case they're going to bond out. Most of those folks never get out. Once the judicial process is over with, and if they pled or get found guilty, they get transferred to DOC custody. That hold transfers with them. So here, we want them held responsible for the crimes they've committed in our community. Once DOC is going to release them, ICE will go to the DOC, pick them up on their hold, and then deport them. So does that make sense? Okay. So we don't have what's going on in some of these other cities taking place here. Secondly, I could tell you under the previous Trump administration, did ICE holds detainers go up? Yes, they did. And they were coming and getting those folks within 48 hours, because by law, we can only hold them 48 hours. So they were coming and getting them, and then whatever they did with them, they did with them. Under the Biden administration, they were almost to zero. We very, very rarely saw ICE detainers. Under the Trump administration now, it's the same thing that we're seeing, which I knew that was going to happen. Some of the other, talk on making us have the ability to arrest people that are here unlawfully, that takes Title VIII justification or authorization. The only people that have Title VIII authorization is your federal agents, FBI, DEA, ICE, Secret Service, okay? So that's problematic on how they can figure out to give us that type of authorization. So right now, we can't arrest people for simply being here unlawfully. Does that make sense? Okay. If that were to happen, and I've asked this to this group, numerous other groups, is that what you want us spending our time on? Because what's going to happen is we're going to have to figure out what we're not going to respond to, because to do that means we have to have access to all their computer systems. We have to make damn sure we're right that this person's here unlawfully. We have to arrest them, book them into our jail, and then transport them all at our cost, your cost, to whatever ICE facility will hold them, which could be Texas or Louisiana. And so I'm just pointing out some of the caveats to this stuff. And those are things that we have to wrangle with, but with input from you. Because the fact of the matter is that will lend to folks calling 911 quite a bit because someone is working somewhere that's here unlawfully, which then creates a response from police or the sheriff, which then takes those deputies away from other duties such as burglary calls, larceny calls, those type of things, because I only have so many people. And so those are things that we've talked at a high level. Will we always, at the sheriff's office, cooperate with ICE? Absolutely. We cooperate with every federal agency that works here in Wichita. That's why we have such a close relationship. So if they're doing some type of raid, and they need us on the outside, blocking traffic or crowd control and those type of things, the sheriff's office was going to assist with that. But when it comes to arresting folks here unlawfully, that's where it becomes a little tricky. And so I just want to be upfront and honest about that. But from an aspect of what they call a 287G program, which we voluntarily can participate in right now, we have chosen not to, and I'll give you the reason why. 4 years ago, when they were really pushing the 287G program, there's a jail aspect of it and a warrant aspect of it. So it really affects jails, where we were doing ICE's job for them. Right now, everybody that gets booked into the jail gets fingerprints, those type of things that enters the computer systems that every federal agency has access to. So ICE every morning gets everybody that was arrested, they run them through their computer system, and if they're here unlawfully, they can put a detainer on them. Do they do it every time? Under Biden, no. We have seen an uptick so far since January 20th or 21st, whenever the executive order was signed. And so that's on ICE. What this would do is give us access to the computer systems. Our deputies inside the jail would research all the information. Our deputies in the jail would then notify, because by their MOU it has to be a commissioned deputy, so I'd have to find a commissioned deputy, a new position, to do nothing but issue detainers on these people. There was 2 sheriff's offices, one in Pennsylvania, one in Oregon, that did that for ICE. Lo and behold, they put detainers on folks that were U.S. citizens, and they got sued. The federal government did not show up to testify for them, and it cost those sheriffs hundreds of thousands of dollars on that lawsuit. So 4 years ago, that's why I chose not to do it. I have to be judicious with your tax dollars. I don't think I'm here, nor is the sheriff's office here, to do the federal government's job. We'll assist them. But I can tell you, we make mistakes and we release people that shouldn't have been released at times. We will mess this up, and it could cost us a lot of money. So we can debate that issue, but there's caveats to this thing if we enter into this realm, because there's no state laws, there's no federal laws that we can exempt ourselves out of a liability. It can't happen. And so I wanted to give you the full story of kind of what's going on with this. But I assure you, we cooperate with ICE. We honor ICE detainers, so the sanctuary county, city stuff is not here. And for the most part, the folks that commit the heinous crimes, just like if you're a U.S. citizen, they stay in our custody here. We don't have George Soros and his group coming and bailing them out. And so it's just different here than what you're seeing on the news and other places. So with that, I'll take any questions you might have.
Thank you. Okay, I wanted to say that I've been on the Sheriff's Civil Board for quite a few years now, and he's real good at updating us on all the policy changes, and we've been watching the jail as far as quantity of jailers that he had, and it's been increasing and everything's getting better, and I really think that therapist is really going to help us with the retaining the good ones. And so with that, if you're a member, you have questions, raise your hands. I'll try to get as many as I can. We'll start right here.
Yeah, Sheriff, you know, and everybody else knows that we have a death penalty law in Kansas. Mm-hmm. And we haven't executed anybody since Hickok and Smith were hung for the Cletter killers back in 1961. Mm-hmm. Now, we have this law on the book, a death penalty law on the book, but we have a Kansas Supreme Court that every time somebody goes to the Kansas Supreme Court, they will knock out the death penalty. Mm-hmm. Now, my question is this. Would you be happy to see a new Kansas Supreme Court?
Yeah, you put me on the spot. Judges have a job to do. And I think for the most part, they do a very good job at it. This particular contention here. And can I tell a story? Okay. So, as you may or may not know, my brother was a sheriff's officer or a sheriff's deputy that was killed in 1996. That was by a 14-year-old kid. And we went to trial the first time. He got found guilty. They had my sister-in-law testify to the last time she saw him, if he had this bruise and this cut and this scratch, and then what they said to each other when they left. And she said, well, I told him I loved him. The appeals court threw it out because it was too prejudiced. Totally disagree with that. And then we had a second trial the week before Christmas the following year. It was horrible on my mom. She died 2 months later. And so I have other feelings about this, and I think that those justices should be voted on and elected like every other judge. And I've had that feeling for a long time. When you talk about the death penalty, you're absolutely correct. I support the death penalty. And so when you talk about people like the Carr brothers, they don't belong here anymore. But the problem is we talk about the death penalty itself. They need to make a decision either to do away with it, to save you all millions of dollars, because it's millions of dollars to defend and prosecute on a death penalty case, or start the process of death is death, and that's what it means. It's one or the other. And so, if they chose to go the other route that saves millions of dollars and they're in prison the rest of their lives, yes, we're paying for them to be in prison the rest of their lives, but they're in prison the rest of their lives. So that's kind of where I'm at on it.
Okay, good question, Zach. Sheriff, appreciate the job you're doing. Tell us about the quality of applicants you're getting.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about how you, the people are doing better with what they've got.
Yeah.
Talk about the quality of that.
Yeah, so needless to say, when we had less applicants and what the pay was, our quality was not good. So we were not hiring a lot of people. Yes, they passed our background stuff, but they were not quality. We're seeing a lot better quality at this point, partly because of the pay and because of through word of mouth on how we treat our people. And it's all about the quality. Now, granted, I wish I'd make millions of dollars if I could figure out how to, the backgrounds, the polygraphs, the psyche, everything we do to hire somebody, that person's not going to have sex with another inmate in there. If you can figure that out, I'll pay you to do it, because you're always going to have some of those bad apples. But we are seeing a lot more applicants and a lot better quality of applicants.
Good to have you here, Sheriff. You said crime is down in Wichita, Sedgwick County, except for juvenile. Can you tell us why? What are we doing right?
Well, I think it's partly because of the targeting of certain individuals that commit those kind of crimes, gang members, for instance. And so there's been specific targeting of individual groups or people that were committing most of the violent crime. A lot of those folks are in our custody right now. And so when that happens, it goes down. There's a joint task force on property crimes. And so auto thefts, shoplifts, burglaries to autos, that group is doing a phenomenal job. And a lot of times when we run into those individuals or groups, they're all tied in together. And if you can dismantle those groups, property crime is going to go down. And we've seen a major decrease in property crime because of that task force.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks again for coming tonight.
Thank you.
A couple weeks ago, we had an inauguration, and I heard there was some police officers from Wichita that was contributing to the law enforcement effort there. Did you have any of your people, have you had in the past?
No.
How did that process work?
Yeah, you got to be invited. And I know through some folks with Wichita Police Department, because of training they've had back in DC and stuff, they made contact with the right people that they've been invited on the last two. And so we haven't been invited yet. It's something that I have no qualms going and doing. We're not as big as the police department. Staffing wise, we wouldn't be able to send 40, but if we could send 10, we could probably afford to do that.
Okay, thank you.
Sure, thank you for the phenomenal job you've done for us.
Thank you.
The cases in Oregon where the sheriff's office was sued, is that a state, our state legislature pass a law to do that, or is that a federal?
No, they sued them at a federal level. And so, again, we have 2 judges in the room, so federal law we can't exempt ourselves out of. State law they could try, but I think it would still be an uphill battle to exempt if we made a mistake on something that could prevent us from being sued.
Sir, I heard there's some gang violence going on the west side of the town, on the west side. What do you do to prevent gang violence?
A gang what?
Gang violence.
Gang violence. So, yeah, so remember, yes, we can work in the city. We leave city policing up to the Wichita Police Department. Most of our gang activity is in the Oak Lawn area, and we have deputies that work that area a little bit harder to hold those folks accountable that are doing any type of gang violence. On the west side of town, I'm not aware because that's with the Wichita Police Department.
One more question.
So the other thing is, a prisoner gets sick and you take him to the hospital. And the hospital says he needs to stay in the hospital to get better. Do you pay for the hospital charges?
Okay, so if an individual is arrested and put in the hospital, so we have a $10 million budget for medical inside the facility. So if they're in our custody, we pay the bill, or you do. And some of that is extremely expensive. And I'll add to that, we got 2 in the hospital right now. They're going to die because of cancer and another lifelong ailment that they've had. Now we're paying for them to get that hospital treatment, but they're going to pass away.
I'm just curious as to what kind of illegal population we have in our community. Do you have many retainers issued to you, or is this a rare occasion?
Yeah, again, during the Trump administration, we have numbers on that. There was the last 2 years of his administration, we had 122 detainers. During the entire time of the Biden administration, there was 14. That would tell me we don't have, it doesn't tell me whether we have an illegal population here or not. What it does tell me is how many of those folks get arrested. And it's a pretty small number, to be real honest with you. But I have no idea what the population is here.
Thanks so much for your research. You did an outstanding job. I asked you this last time you were here, but I'm going to ask it again because I think your answer is very important for everybody here because it's an ongoing debate. Your thoughts on legalizing marijuana. I'll just leave it at that. Your thoughts on legalizing marijuana.
Yeah, I'm not a supporter in any form. Medical marijuana is a misnomer, okay? And all of us probably take some type of medicine, right? How do you get that? Your doctor prescribes it, your pharmacy, doctor writes a script for it, your pharmacy prescribes it. That's how all medicine works in this country. And it has to be approved by the FDA. The FDA is never going to approve marijuana as medical. A doctor, a real doctor, not some dude on the street selling you marijuana saying he's a doctor. A real doctor probably isn't going to prescribe it for you because there's all kinds of studies coming out now that is totally contrary to big marijuana on what it helps with. And a pharmacy is going to have bundles of weed sitting around their pharmacy to give out. I doubt that. That's why our position is if you want to treat it like medicine, then put it through the same steps as every other medicine. I can tell you all kinds of stories, from Colorado and those type of things, that it was going to decrease opioid use. Their opioid use is almost doubled now since they've legalized and everything else. I truly believe it's a gateway drug. I've interviewed thousands of people, and they either started with alcohol or marijuana before they went on. And so it hasn't hit again in legislation, but generally those groups wait until the very end, give us like 2 days to prepare, and then they have a hearing. And so it's not been introduced, but that's going to be our same mantra this year as well.
Okay, Jeff, back here, Ken.
When it comes to the sex trafficking that is here in Wichita, how often do you guys are able to arrest those that are paying for the sex? And then also, is there an average age of men, and what percentage of them are actually criminals?
I'll take the second question first. There is, I couldn't tell you the average, but it can be as young as 20 and as old as 70. I mean, we see it all over the board. The first question, it first takes the victim to actually disclose. And sometimes that's the hardest thing that happens. And once they disclose, then we're able to follow up, then we're able to make arrests. Statistics can be misleading. As you all know, you can create a statistic for anything, and is it actually correct? Because it depends on how you get the statistics and the language and those type of things. So far, well, at least last year, we worked something like 17 human trafficking cases. Is that to say that there's only 17 cases that's happened here? No. It's kind of like domestic violence. At some point, folks end up reporting it. But how many times did it happen before that was unreported? And so human trafficking is one of those things that is still hard to pinpoint statistics on because it all comes down to the victim reporting.
Jeff, over here.
Thank you, Sheriff, for what you do for us. But my question is, and you may have already covered this, but what happened to the Lake Afton for the juveniles? What do you housing them at? What kind of facility do you keep them at now that we don't have the Lake Afton?
Yeah, so it's King's Camp that had been out there for several years as another facility. Ember of Hope took over the contract from St. Francis. St. Francis had it downtown here, and now they're housing those kids out there at King's Camp. And so is it a semi-lockdown facility? Yes. Again, kids, they're still taking them to school and those type of things. They're refusing to go to school. They're refusing to go to bed. They still have cell phones that they have access to, so they won't turn off their cell phone when they're supposed to. And we're making those calls because a lot of times, just like at JIAC and stuff, there's all kinds of rules and laws on putting hands on juveniles, even though some of these juveniles are bigger than the staff. And so they call us to intervene quite often.
Hey, Jeff, back here.
When there's an inmate in the hospital, how many deputies are assigned to that inmate, and are they commissioned deputies, jail deputies, and how does it affect our judicial efficiency?
Mm-hmm. So, depending on what they're charged with. If they're charged with a very heinous felony crime, I want commissioned deputies that are armed watching them. If it's say it's a murder suspect that is younger and for whatever reason they went to the hospital, it's probably going to be 2. We're not going to let that person escape. If it is other type of crimes, misdemeanors, property crimes, those type of things, then jail personnel sets on them. And they have tasers and those type of things, but they're not equipped with a firearm. The one thing that we always have to worry about is that them playing the game of whatever they got going on medically, calling outside to their family saying, hey, I'm going to St. Francis, and them trying to come up there and get him out of our custody. And so we have to be very judicious about that.
I'm curious how many ICE agents in Sedgwick County, and is that sufficiently staffed?
Oh, it's not. I can tell you that. How many agents they have. And remember, it's not just for Sedgwick County. It's for Sedgwick County and every county west. And so ICE, when I was working with them quite a bit, there was 5 of them here. There could be a little bit more, a little bit less. I will tell you that for 2 weeks until last Friday, and if you saw social media and stuff, people were putting out, because cops were out on a shooting or something else, and they were putting out that they were out on an ICE raid. I guarantee you those were all false, because every ICE agent in this county was in Chicago, Illinois doing operations. There was nobody here. So when you see that stuff, it just adds to the fear that the community has that's not true.
One more question, please. You know, I read in the newspaper some time back, in California, somebody murdered somebody and then he was in the jail, but he became very sick. He was taken to the hospital. The doctor said he needs a liver transplant. It's going to cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. It was a newspaper. Now, are you going to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars to save somebody who committed 2 murders? What do you do in Wichita? If somebody gets sick, if someone needs a liver transplant, are you prepared to spend money to save that man's life?
The answer to that is yes. By law, we have to provide medical care, whatever that might be. There's some folks that have come into our custody. There's a guy that a few years back came into our custody, a little bit older gentleman, doesn't have a criminal record, went and tried to rob a place right down the street here. He comes into our custody and he's like, hey, I'm scheduled for heart surgery next week. So we contacted a judge and the judge said, and you can pay for that on your own, we'll release you out on bond. And so yeah. So, I mean, there's some cases where we can do that. When you're talking murder and stuff, it's not going to happen. They're going to stay in our custody, and yes, we have to pay for it by law.
Well, I want to tell you about personal experience. I'm a physician. I used to work in a small hospital in Northwest Kansas, and the police brought a man, and he was having shortness of breath, he couldn't breathe, and he needs to stay in the hospital. I told the police that he's in congestive heart failure, he needs to stay in the hospital. You know what the police said? Doc, we don't have money to pay for the hospital. We release him, you do whatever you want. So he took the shackles away.
Yeah, but you're taking a chance of that person committing another heinous crime in the community. And I guess in small counties they can get by with that. Here we could not. Yeah.
Jeff, we got one more question. And don't we ask the best questions that you
Absolutely.
Well, I'll try and follow that after that introduction. But Sheriff, there's been a lot of reports about counterfeit drug and overdoses resulting in death. How has Sedgwick County done? How has Kansas done? And how is this a problem? How are we doing? Because the second part of the question is, I've heard there is a new version of fentanyl or maybe something that's even more potent than fentanyl that's out on the market, and it is being distributed now in.
Yeah, and so fentanyl is still a huge issue here. From an overdose standpoint, we've seen less deaths in 24 than we've seen in the years prior. Overdoses are still way up. The reason for less overdose deaths is naloxone, which, if administered, brings them out of that opioid overdose. And so I attribute it to that. It's not. I still get numbers from the police department and stuff. Overdose calls are nonstop. But most of the time it's because someone had Narcan, not naloxone, or we arrived quickly enough. But here's what I'll tell you about Narcan. Believe it or not, people still get drugs in the facility. And we have overdoses in there, and we're having to hit those people 4 or 5 times to bring them back. So Narcan can bring you back, but you better have plenty in supply. And so from the second part of that question, yes. I mean, it's a xylazine is a horse tranquilizer that now is being mixed with fentanyl. If you take that drug that has fentanyl and xylazine, Narcan can offset the opioid part, which is the fentanyl. It can't touch the xylazine. And so we're seeing from autopsy reports people dying of the mixture of both. The other thing that's starting to come here is carfentanil, which is even more potent and stronger than just straight fentanyl. The alarming thing that we're seeing is the amount of pills, and I know I've talked to this group before. If we get 10% of what's coming in here, it's a good year. But we're seizing hundreds of thousands of pills and crystal fentanyl. That's become a phenomenon last year. So the crystals are very potent and very dangerous because they can actually soak through your skin. The pills won't soak through your skin. And so the reason for that is, in my opinion, is because you got people here that are going to make their pill mills here and then distribute their own pills. So they're bringing in the straight fentanyl and creating their own pill mills. If you remember on methamphetamine, the reason we don't have labs here anymore is because the state legislature passed a phenomenal law that you can only buy 2 packages of Sudafed, because that's what makes methamphetamine. And when they passed that law, labs quit here. This is different. If you get the fentanyl in, you can buy the binding material, you can buy the press mill, and you can press your own pills. So it is something new that we're facing now. Thank you.